Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News Channel. The 2023 annual meetings of the African Development Bank have come to an end in the Egyptian resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh. The bank paid tribute to its host for warm hospitality and then turned its attention to the 2024 event, which has been scheduled for Nairobi, Kenya. Arise business correspondent Rotu Sudiri sent in this report.
The African Development Bank annual meetings in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, finally came to a close after an engaging, insightful 5 days of discussions, pledges, and announcements of billion-dollar deals. President of the AFDB Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, called the meetings a resounding success.
Without any doubt, this is one of our very best annual meetings ever. 1 week went back so fast for the 2023 annual meetings. We all arrived here, we came together to this beautiful city of Sharm el-Sheikh, the city of peace, to engage in discussions on climate change, to discuss how we will mobilize climate finance and support green growth with the private sector. You came because you believe in Africa. You came because you support Africa. You came because you are a partner of Africa.
Hassan Abdullah, governor of the Central Bank of Egypt, who has served as the chair of the Board of Governors of the AFDB for the past year, handed over to a new chair and expressed his satisfaction with overseeing a vibrant week of activity.
On a personal level, I've spent with you the last few days. It was utmost pleasure and privilege for me. And the most important thing I felt, other than all the deliberations we had, is that I have been able to make a lot of friends. So thank you all for your presence and for being here for us. On behalf of Egypt, we would like to extend our congratulations to Kenya for being selected as the host country for the 2024 African Development Bank annual meetings, scheduled to take place in Nairobi from 27th to 31st of May 2024. We are confident that Kenya, with its strategic location, vibrant economy, and dynamic society, will provide an outstanding setting for the 2024 annual meetings. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all had a pleasant stay and fruitful week in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I look forward to see you again in the 2024 AFDB annual meetings in Nairobi, the green city under the sun. Safe travels to you all. Thank you very much.
Professor Unjuguna Ndugu, Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury and Economic Planning, Kenya, takes over as the new chair of the Board of Governors for the next 12 months as the annual meetings head to Nairobi.
I do also thank the Egyptian people for their great hospitality and warm reception over the past few days. In fact, we feel overfed by the Egyptian hospitality. I also humbly accept the role of the chairperson of the boards of governors of the African Development Bank and the African Development Fund, and it allows me actually to extend my appreciation to Honorable Hassan Abdallah, Governor of Egypt, for his efforts as chairperson of the boards of governors for the last 1 year.
As is tradition at the closing ceremony, a video of the next destination in the following year is played, highlighting the economic strengths of the next host nation. In this case, for 2024, the economic giant of East Africa, Kenya.
Welcome to Kenya. It's the economic powerhouse and the hub of East and Central Africa, and steadily realizing its full potential as a global player on the world stage.
There was then a handing over of the chair of governor's position, complete with the incoming chair giving gifts to the outgoing chair. And so an exciting, productive African Development Bank annual meetings finally comes to a close. We had a week of high-level delegations involving heads of state and the private sector, We had a rich celebration of the rich cultural history of Africa. And most importantly, we had the flagging off of projects, billion-dollar projects that will facilitate Africa's transition to an economically prosperous green future. From the International Conference Center in the beautiful coastal city of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, Ruwase Odiri, Arise News.
Correspondent Ruwase Odiri there, but meanwhile, back home in Nigeria, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank has increased its benchmark interest rate for the third time this year by 50 basis points to 18.5%. This was revealed by CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele at the Post-Monetary Policy Committee press briefing held last Wednesday, May the 24th. This latest increase marks the 7th consecutive rate hike by the Apex Bank in its fight against inflation. In a related development, Nigeria's gross domestic product grew by 2.31% year-on-year in real terms in the first quarter of 2023, 1.21 percentage points lower than the 3.52% recorded in the previous quarter, and 0.8% lower compared to 3.11% recorded in the corresponding period of 2022. This is according to the recently released Gross Domestic Product Report by the National Bureau of Statistics. The Bureau blamed the lull in the GDP growth rate on the scarcity of the naira, which occurred in the first quarter of the year as the central bank held on to its naira swap policy. In a separate development, the federal government has approved a new policy that will allow commercial banks to issue customers with debit cards that will double as national identity cards at no extra cost. The Council gave the approval on Wednesday at a meeting presided over by President Muhammadu Buhari. Briefing journalists at the end of the meeting, Minister of Communication and Digital Economy, Issa Pantami, said the directive was from the National Identity Management Commission. Pantami said that although the NIMC Act of 2007 only mandates Nigerians to have a national identity number and not necessarily a printout card, demands for cards have increased nonetheless. We're now being joined by a former president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Babatunde Ruwase, for some insight. Welcome to This Day Live, Mr. Ruwase. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, thank you very much indeed. Let's start with the African Development Bank meetings in Sharm el-Sheikh. The role of multilateral organizations like the AFDB in the African development process. And the main theme of this year's meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, being climate adaptation financing, involvement of the private sector. And then that report that was issued by the AFDB about the outlook for the African economy, indicating that there will be a drop in GDP growth and that, in fact, the debt overhang is a major challenge that many African countries will have to face. What are your observations?
Thank you. It's from what? He's still talking, I can.
Please go ahead. Hello, Mr. Ruwase, can you hear me? I can hear you.
Yes, I lost you momentarily there.
Okay, but I can hear you.
I think you wanted my opinion on what happened in Egypt.
Yes.
The conference, the summit.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, please.
Hello?
The theme, the outlook report for Africa, and some of the submissions with regard to private sector financing, Africa taking the initiative, and the responsibilities outlined going forward for African leaders.
Yes. Thank you again. It was a good outing from the optics. He's talking. I can't hear him.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Just talk. I can hear you.
Okay, I didn't get some of the things you said, but probably I know you wanted to have my own opinion on what happened in Egypt during the summit. It was a good outing for Africa, and I think particularly the Development Bank for Africa. Yes, it's been ascertained that for Africa to catch up with the required emission deficit, we will need over $245 billion. But ADB had done something. They said they will raise about 30 billion to address various issues, including energy and pharmaceutical capacity, which I think is a good attempt. But then it's also mentioned that this will have to do with good governance. Good governance, you know, because African countries, whatever you do, you need to have a good government in place, good government policy for things to thrive. Now that they are even looking at the direction of private sector to provide the funding that is required to meet this target, environment must be right for the private sector to key into that attempt. I also observed, disturbingly too, that when the communique was issued, there was a disagreement on the Russia invasion or Russia-Ukraine crisis. That also is a bad signal that when we are talking of something as important as addressing the climate challenge that Africa is having and health, we also got bogged down by whether it was an invasion that happened in Ukraine or it was a conflict between Ukraine and Russia. But I think in all, going by what was said and the promises that were made and the verbal commitments of participants, it looks a very good outing. And if we can see it to fruition, it will be of good benefit to Africa.
Well, you'll recall that at that conference meeting, it is called, one of the things that Dr. Akinwumi Adesina said, can you hear me, Mr. Ruwase? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, one of the things that the president of the African Development Bank said was that money matters, money matters, money matters. Okay, we had this at COP26 in Glasgow, with many of the development agencies of the world, including financial institutions, making promises that, they will make money available for climate change adaptation financing. But that has not happened. Now, in Africa, we're looking inwards. The African Development Bank is talking about what Africans and African institutions can do for themselves. What is the guarantee that that capacity will be provided?
Well,
did you hear me?
Yeah, I lost you momentarily there.
Yeah, I'm saying, I'm hearing some sound in the background. I'm asking you, can African private institutions provide the financing where it looks like the response of the West has been, for the best part, hypocritical?
Well, I think Africa has no choice but to help itself. And we just have to get our hearts right. Like I said, good governance. Oh, he's talking to me.
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yes, I said, from what has happened, it's like Africa has no choice but to look inwards and help ourselves within the Committee of Nations. And what can guarantee this is good governance. There are a lot of potentials in the private sector in Africa, a lot of money there that could come in. But then people will only commit if there is confidence and trust in governance, which is one of the greatest problems that we have. How we are going to marshal this is the question. We need to address that. If we address that, I'm sure the private sector in Africa will be ready to take on the challenge. And we have to help ourselves. Everybody has problems. Yes, this emission problem is not created by Africa, and we have to also press for whatever the other part of the world can do to us. Dr. Adesina had said they were going to use their equity of $25 billion to raise private fund of almost $30 billion. And I believe that they should be able to do it because they must have done their homework and they must have seen the potential and the possibility of achieving such a feat, I would say.
Okay, let's come back home. Dr. Adesina left Sharm el-Sheikh and came straight home to Nigeria, where he was one of the speakers at the pre-inauguration lecture that was held ahead of the May 29 inauguration tomorrow, which is a subject we've been trying to focus on today. And some of the things he said is that, one, the president-elect, when he becomes president, has to restructure the economy. Two, that he has to address the debt-to-revenue ratio, which we're now told is very close to 100%. And that, as a matter of urgency, he must end the inefficient fuel subsidies. So these are some of the things that are out there in the public domain. What do you think should be the priorities for Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu when he gets into office tomorrow morning?
Yeah, when the incoming president gets into office, one thing he has to do, he has to insulate governance from politics. He has to appoint people who are not politicians to key areas, because politicians, because of the entry fee of politics, which is very unfortunate, an ordinary politician will be under serious pressure to recoup whatever investment had been put into the project, which shouldn't have been a project. The problem we also have is there are a lot of expectation from politicians when it comes to taking care of so many persons. So entry fee is so expensive. Expectation is different from what you should do. I mean, if, for instance, you are appointed as a lawmaker, you should just simply go there and make good laws for good governance and for the betterment of everybody. But we all know what it is. I mean, a lot of financial demand, both from party and from your consequence. So if he wants to achieve the set objective and we want to move this nation forward, we must not put politicians in critical areas, because the objective, what they want to do, is different from what will take us to where we are expected to be. Like you asked the gentleman that came on before me, the outgoing government have in place certain measures and bodies that should actually deliver optimally if they were able to operate. But one can see that the political influence in those areas had actually denied them the opportunity of achieving that objective. And that was very, very clear even when the election whistle was blown. You could see people in critical areas trying to become politicians. We don't need such people at this time of our need. We should go for people who are technocrats, who are ready to deliver, who are real professionals, not the politicians. Well,
Mr. Ruwase, you were in charge as Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I used Dr. Adesina's presentation to try to get your views on some specific issues. One, fuel subsidy removal. Two, increase in taxation. Three, debt to revenue ratio. Those three issues, if you could comment on them. Hello, are you with me? Hello?
Yes, I'm with you.
Yes, so I wanted you to comment on
I'm with you.
Specific issues raised in that submission relating to the economy. And I'm just using that as a benchmark for issues that Nigerians are concerned about. Fuel subsidy, tax, debt to revenue ratio. Hello, did you hear me?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes, our revenue.
No, please go ahead. I can hear you.
Can't hear him.
No, I can hear you. Just go ahead.
Yes, debt to revenue ratio, where revenue is low because of various problems that we are having with our oil, which is our main export product, and the fact that we are not exporting as much as we should do. We need to address this to shore it up. And also, we are also committing a lot to fuel subsidy. The fuel subsidy has to go. If it goes, we will have more revenue to address, to take care of our problems. And also, the tax system, we have to widen the tax base, not actually taxing everybody that's already paying, but we have to look for a way of shoring it up and also how we are going to re-energize the economy. The manufacturers today, those who are doing business, we all know what we are going through. It's very expensive to buy forex for importation. Power is another challenge. So a lot of all these problems are interwoven. You need to address them and make sure, if we address the issue of for instance, must go. If it doesn't go, we don't have money to address critical issues, education, health, and other security, things like that. We need to address that. Then also cost of governance, which you did not mention, is also one of the areas where we are committing a lot of resources than what we are getting out of it. Of course, that writes on what I said earlier on about entry in politics is quite expensive, and you want to recoup what you have put in there. So when the government comes in, we should look for technocrats, people who know what they are doing, who are dilute professionals to help drive the economy. And I think with those ones, we should be able to get very close to where we are supposed to be, if not our destination. Okay,
Mr. Ruwase, inflation is over 22%, 22.2224%, we're told. The Monetary Policy Committee has increased interest rate to 18.5%. Now, this is about the 7th consecutive time or so that the MPC will do that. But here in Nigeria, we have seen that raising interest rate does not necessarily help. Why is that? What are those fundamentals that the Monetary Policy Committee is not addressing?
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate that the reason we are...
I can hear you. Please go ahead. No, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
I didn't hear this, the other part of what you said. Well, I think the monetary policy, unfortunately, what we've been doing in the past, from May till now, we have raised this monetary rate for 7 times. And what we are trying to fight is to make sure that this inflation is curbed, to also foreign exchange differential. But every time we try to do this, we just get the opposite of what we are doing. And for us, for the people in business, it also increased costs. It also results in a lot of unsold production. And of course, some might close down. Banks will also increase their rate. The 5.5%, the 0.0% that we have now, I can assure you that every bank will now start writing to you that your interest rate has gone up by that magnitude. It is unfortunate, but I think the government, because the forex that we also give as reason on Wednesday, by Friday, at the parallel market, which is where most importers of items that are not on the list, on the official list, get money from, and even those who are on that because you don't have enough exchange, went to over 760 naira per dollar. So what we say we are doing, we are not getting results. Government has to do something for the real sector, the manufacturers. How we are going to be insulated against all these unnecessary increases in rate. I mean, like this is where subsidies should go, actually, if you ask me. Those who are in production, not consumption, which we are doing with the PMS. So we need to actually do something about how to address the critical problem. The problem we're having is we are not making enough foreign exchange. How do we make enough foreign exchange? If we remove subsidy, for instance, and we are able to we will have more money, foreign exchange, in our kitty to address more critical things, maybe importation of raw materials where we have to import raw materials, spare parts where we have to import raw parts, and also to encourage export. To encourage export, I mean, where government is trying now that you can use your export proceeds for whatever you chose to do. I think those are the areas that we need to look at to actually get out of this problem, that else we'll continue to increase rates. It will not solve the problem. It has not addressed the problem. 7 times we have done it. We have been coming out worse than where we were. So I think we should do something differently and look at the other end.
Okay, as we begin to wrap up, Mr. Ruwase, let me ask you. The other story that we took in the introduction is this introduction of bank debit cards as national identity cards. In other words, that commercial banks, deposit banks, can now issue debit cards, which can also function as identity cards. How does that help in the direction of the harmonization of national identification in Nigeria? Is it a good idea, or we need a more holistic approach, for national identification instead of the multiple identification system that we seem to have?
Yes, I remember that during the government of President Goodluck Jonathan, we tried to do this. It was even launched, and the president then showed everybody on the newspaper what his own type of the card that he got. I don't know whether, I'm not sure if we are not able to make any success of it at that time. I'm not too sure this is what we need now. I can't see how it's going to make any difference from what we have. Yes, we say we are going to harmonize, but then we all know how things are when we want to harmonize. Why don't we look at some of those ones that we have already? We have a national identity card, for God's sake. Why can't we now turn our national identity card to and make sure that it is the one that is actually the identity card? Let's leave. It's not everybody that's in Nigeria that will have a bank account. Some people don't want to have a bank account. Some people don't desire a bank account. So how does that now, those people will be left out of the pool, and then it's going to cost money to start going that way again. I think a national identity card could be enhanced, that you could use that number anywhere, like a social security number, what is done elsewhere. You don't need to, I don't have to have a debit card. I don't need to have a debit card. Some people will not have debit cards. There are people who are not close to where banks are, they don't want to have debit cards. So I think this is just an exercise in futility, if you ask me.
Well, on that note, although it was also pointed out by the federal government and Federal Minister Issa Pantami that when this is done, it will be at no extra cost to the average Nigerian. That point was made. But I get your point also about the fact that not every Nigerian will need a debit card, and not everyone is covered within the banking system. Thank you very much, Mr. Babatunde Ruwase, for joining us on this Live, the Sunday Talk Show.